Well, I had this all planned. We went on vacation to celebrate my daughter's 50th birthday. Don't even ask, she's older than me. Tammy, stand up. So she wanted to do something fun and different, so we went to Cabo San Lucas, and we got back home at midnight last night. So it's easy like Sunday morning. That's a perfect song for me. I wish all those out there watching on live stream could have heard that, because that's exactly how we should see every Sunday morning. I wasn't about to miss this Sunday so that I could share with you. We were celebrating her 50th, which is not until October, but we have a straight A student in her daughter, my granddaughter, will be starting high school at Lee Summit North, and she does not like to miss school. So we had to go in the summer instead of in the fall. So we had a great time. It was a great, relaxing time. And this is the first time Tammy's been here in a while. She grew up in this church. She was 12 when we started here, and she was 4 when Unity found me. And so this has been her life, and it's great to raise children in a positive environment. And so this is the first time she's been in a while, because she's usually at home with my mother while I'm able to come to church on Sundays. So my mother's with my sister for the next week, and this gives Tammy a break as well. Speaking of enjoying celebrating life, some girlfriends got together and decided they wanted to celebrate their 40th and something different. So they decided on a restaurant, Ocean View Restaurant. And you can imagine we had a lot of Ocean View in the last week, and it was gorgeous. So they got together for lunch at the Ocean View Restaurant because they had some very good-looking waiters. That was their reason. And then 10 years later, at 50, they decided that they wanted to go back to the Ocean View because they had good food and good wine and cute waiters. And they were 50. And then 10 years later, when they were 60, they decided to have a reunion again at the Ocean View Restaurant because they could eat in peace and quiet. They enjoyed the beautiful ocean view, and the waiters were sweet boys. And then 10 years after that, their 60th, they celebrated at the Ocean, or their 70th, they celebrated at the Ocean View because it was wheelchair accessible. They had an elevator, and the waiters were kind. And then 10 years later, they decided to go to the Ocean View because they'd never been there before. Every now and then something would happen, and Tammy would say, "Mom, I just told you that a minute ago." So I'll be meeting at the Ocean View pretty soon. My talk today, it's all good. And I planned this about 2 weeks ago, and then something happened. Something happened that shook my world. And I'm sure you've had some experiences like this. Jenna Beth, one of our congregants, I know she's here somewhere. Jenna Beth sent an email to me and Duke. She said, "Dear friends in my closest spiritual circle, my faith has been shaken. The recent story in the news regarding my cousin and her family has put me in a certain quandary. I've been following my cousin, Veronica's retirement, as she and her husband sold their home at Saratoga Lake, New York, and took off for Alabama to retire close to their daughter in Alabama. I followed their progress daily on Facebook, and then I saw this article. The article was on July 8th, the second day of our trip. And the article was about a murder-suicide, where Jenna Beth's cousin had gone to live near her daughter, and she and her husband be grandparents, as I know many of us, and I know I do, enjoy. The father, 50, took his wife's life. She was 44, an elementary school teacher in Redland, Alabama. Apparently took his own life, one of their triplets' lives. The triplets are 12, the oldest daughter 13. She got out and ran to a neighbor, and the triplets got out, but they had gunshot wounds, and they're in the hospital. So Jenna Beth's question is, how can I say that all things work together for good in a situation like this? So she's turning to her ministers and asking this question. And I didn't have an answer. Now, you know, Duke is on vacation in Europe. So I wrote Duke and I said, what would you say? And he said, Sandra, you've had some deep experiences with life. Draw from that. Now, some of you may be a little weary of hearing me talk about the death of my 2-year-old son from drowning, the murder of my father when I was only 25. But when I hear someone having a dark night of the soul experience, that's what I draw from. I can identify with how they might be feeling. And I can truly say that all things do work together for good, for them that love God and are called according to God's purpose, not because I read that scripture, but because I've lived it. You've heard me say one of the first things that popped up when I finally dug my head out of the sand and was able to see the light of day and came out of a fetal position for a while. The first thing that popped up was a scripture that says, I will restore to you the years the locusts have eaten, from the book of Joel, 2nd chapter, 25th verse. That has been my mantra. That's my go-to when I'm experiencing a dark night. So I thought, how else can I minister to someone having that kind of experience in their life? And I remembered what Jesus said in John 16:33. In the world, you will have trouble and sorrow, but take heart, I have overcome the world. In another scripture, he says, these things I do, you may do also, and even greater works. What was he saying? It's all good. Now that's an urban slang. You can look up the Urban Dictionary and find that. You hear that a lot these days. It's a cliche. Someone cuts you off in traffic, it's all good. Well, maybe you don't say that. Maybe you do a one-finger salute or something like that. Someone makes a mistake. Maybe mispronounces your German name or something. It's all good. Is it all good? How, when we experience tragedy in our lives, can we say it's all good? Because time is a great healer. And I can testify to that. At the time, it seems like the worst thing that could ever happen. But give it time. Time is a great healer. So I decided perhaps I should share from a biblical perspective one of many stories of the dark night of the soul. How about Job? Anybody ever heard of Job? You know anything about Job? Everything that could possibly go wrong in Job's life happened. We find it in the book of Job. About a millennium before Jesus walked the earth is the story of Job. We don't know who wrote it. Some credit Moses. Others say Solomon wrote it. They don't really know. They know Job didn't write it because it tells of his whole life all the way to the end. But this is a testimony of faith. Job had everything. He had all the livestock you can imagine. He and his wife had 10 children, 7 boys and 3 girls. 10 children. Everybody was happy. People looked up to Job. He was well respected. He was known as a God-fearing man. He loved God. He worshiped God. He praised God. His son was having a party. And a servant came to Job. It was a big party. Everybody was having a good time. Lots of wine. And a servant comes and tells Job some bad news. That some murderers and thieves had come and they had killed his sheep and they had killed many of his servants. And then Job gets more bad news. More of his servants and his livestock are destroyed by some marauders. So he and his wife leave the party and they go to check things out at home to see what's really going on. And all hell breaks loose at the party. Somehow there's some kind of a storm that comes up and kills everybody. All of his children, all 10 of them, dead. Now here's a man who, from all intents and purposes, had everything. His life was going perfectly, and then boom. Has that ever happened to you? I doubt there's anybody in here that hasn't had some kind of experience that has caused you to fall on your knees. So Job and his friends started talking about, what did you do to deserve this? You must have done something wrong. Because you know, in the Old Testament, we read a lot about the punishing God, reward and punishment. Quid pro quo. You do this, you get that. You don't do this, you don't get that. Right? You must have done something. So they agonized, they analyzed, they looked over his life. They tried to figure out, what is it that could have caused this to happen to me? But no matter what he thought about, he would never blame God. My God is a good God. My God is a just and loving God. But when all those children were killed, his wife tried to convince him to curse God. What kind of God will allow this to happen? Have you ever asked yourself that when you're going through something like what Jenabeth's family is going through? What kind of God do we serve that would allow bad things to happen to good people? I'm sure Job asked that question. I'm sure he had that in his mind. Now, Job is one of the longest books in the Old Testament. It's 42 chapters, so it takes a while to get through it. But in the process, what you find is after he goes through all this questioning and sorting and trying to figure it out, and there are no answers, he gets so deep down in his pain that there's no place else to go but inward. In the story, the literal story, it's a battle between Satan and God. And Job is the test. Now we know in metaphysical terms, that Satan is error thinking and that God is our higher self. So we have a battle going on between our ego and our personality. And our thoughts determine which one will win. So here's Job, and his ego says, man, you know you caused all this. No, what did you do? What's wrong with you? How could you let this happen? His God self says, there is no other but God. Believe in me. Have faith in me. All things work together for good for them that love God and are called according to our higher purpose, the God in us. Can you imagine that battle? You're facing the reality of what just happened, and over here you know that there's good in it, but you can't really reconcile the two. It's difficult. It takes time. It takes time. Over time, because no matter what happened, Job still believed, he still kept his faith that there's good in everything. And because of his faith and holding on to that belief, restoration began to happen in his life. Sort of like Joel 2:25, I will restore to you the years the locusts have eaten. I've experienced that restoration over and over again. Much like Job, he and his wife had 10 children, 7 boys and 3 girls, the second time. Once he practiced forgiveness of himself and forgiveness of his friends who were trying so hard to convince him that he must have done something wrong for God to punish him. Forgiving himself of even believing, even having the thought that God would cause this kind of thing to happen in his life. Through forgiveness, through prayer, he gained understanding. Proverbs said, get wisdom, and with all thy getting, get understanding. He began to understand that he could raise his consciousness in spite of his circumstances, that we create our reality by what we think, what we believe, and what we do. Unity's third principle. He didn't know Unity's principles. The Fillmores weren't around at that time, but these are old principles that go way back to the beginning of time. They're not new. New words, new concepts, metaphysical interpretation, but the same theology. There is but one presence and one power active in the universe and in my life, regardless of the outer circumstances. And that presence is God, the good, omnipotent. So Geneviève's email rocked my world a little bit. And I had to go deep within and go back to those times when I was in that position, when it just happened, before enough time had passed that I could put things in perspective and see the good in one of the worst times of my life. The minister who eulogized my son was Moritz Earhart. I've not seen him in all those years since. I don't know that he's still a Unity minister. He was from Germany. And at the end of a song that I loved because I liked the words, "Earth has no sorrow that heaven cannot heal." The song is called "Come Ye Disconsolate." He said, "Sandra, you are not disconsolate. This is part of your journey, and this was your son's spiritual journey. Our journeys don't begin and end at the same time. We come in this life for a purpose, and when we leave, we fulfill that purpose." He had a purpose in your life. How he journeyed doesn't matter. It's the journey itself that matters, that he came into your life for a reason. And eventually you'll see the blessing, the gift, even in grief. The most important thing he said was, don't look at what you have lost. Look at what you have left. Now, my daughter at the time was 6 years old, and she's getting ready to turn 50. Look at what I have left. Look at the gift. And since that time, another son since when she was 8, and then grandchildren. Don't look at what you have lost. Look at what you have left. Now, why is it that things happen to some people at this time and somebody else is not having the same experience? Because as someone once said, we're all angels with one wing, and we have to embrace each other in order to fly. So my job and your job, when someone like Geneviève shares with you such a tragic experience, is to take that wing, wrap it around her, and help her to fly. Help her to rise above, and all those who are experiencing this, to rise above those circumstances, so that we can take our own experience and turn it into something good. Make your mess your message. Make your test your testimony. That's what Job did. If you haven't read that story, and it's a deep story to get through, this might be a big help to you when you're going through a dark night of the soul, or someone else is and calls on you for help and you are speechless. You don't know what to say. How can I say to someone who's just experienced such a tragedy, all things work together for good for them that love God? In other words, it must have happened because you don't love God? No. What I'm saying is, in time, you will see the good in every situation in your life. Give it time. That's what that slang means. It's all good. Yeah, maybe at this moment it doesn't feel good. But when you put it in perspective, get some distance from it, actually it's all good. If you can learn something from the experience, it's a good experience. If you can use that something to help somebody else, it's a good experience. If you can take your test and turn it into a testimony, it's a good experience. If you can take your mess and turn it into a message, it's all good. No matter how bad it might look on the outside. So Job was suffering. Why? Because ego. That's where our suffering comes from. We don't always make sense of things that happen in life. Some things just don't make sense. You can't figure it out. Why did this happen? Who made it happen? Why did God let it happen? The truth is it happened. Now what are you going to do with that experience? How are you going to make that into something good? He will restore to you the years the locusts have eaten. Whether that means a financial challenge, relationship issues, death, whatever is going on in your life, like Job, trust in the power of God, the one presence and the one power active in your life to restore to you the years, to give you that time to find the good in every situation. When we sing that song, I will sing of God's mercy every day, every hour. God gives me power. I will sing and give praise to thee for all the dangers, toils, and snares that he has brought me out. He is my God, and I'll serve him no matter what the test. Trust and never doubt. Jesus will surely bring you out. He never failed me yet. Everyone suffers from something. No difficulty, no discovery, no pain, no gain. It's all good. Let's take that into the silence.